Hey everybody, what's up? What's happening? I am back again. Seems like I was just here. And in fact, I was at 8 a.m. this morning. And guess what? We have a great show, a really great show lined up for you today. We have the Crimies because it is the first Friday of every month, and this is their time. And I kind of previewed this this morning on the Astro Weather Report. And we're going to talk about Gnosticism and the great debate. It's not a great debate, but it's in the air, right? Gnosticism, the debate of Gnosticism is in the air. And Gnosticism, an alternative system and view of the world and the universe that seems to be diametrically opposed to Christianity. And that's one of the things that I'm going to ask Steve about is there room for a third model, a synthesis of Gnosticism and Christianity? We're going to find that out today on the Friday FARcast. But before I bring the Crimies on, of course, I've got to give a shout out to the sponsor of the show. And by the way, thank you for being patient today. It's been a Mercury retrograde morning. So some of you are probably aware of the fact that I've been kind of managing a fundraiser for Dorothy, who watches the show and listens to the show. And so I'm I'm closing that down now. And I was I was on with GoFundMe customer service for about almost an hour to try to get into my account. Right. So I finally sorted that out and got in there and did what I needed to do. And I've got more steps. It's like Mercury retrograde Capricorn, and dealing with these hierarchical groups and organizations. Like, so when you deal with GoFundMe, yeah, there's the Aquarian element of GoFundMe it's group oriented, crowdsourcing, things like that. But you still have to go through the Capricorn gate, right? You still have to go through the Capricorn gatekeeper to get to the the Emerald City with GoFundMe. Anyway, that was a very interesting and albeit time-consuming experience this morning. So we're running behind, and I'll blame it on Mercury retrograde. You know why? Because Mercury retrograde can't point its finger back at you. So no, that was your fault. Okay. So what I do want to do is I do want to talk about the sponsor of the show. And that is, of course, True Hemp Science. And True Hemp Science just keeps winning, right? It's such a win to partner up with Chris and his product. And I just recently turned John Levi onto some True Hemp Science, and boy, he had rave reviews for it in terms of its efficacy. So that's always good, right? When we can share what we experience and find value in our space with other content creators, and hopefully make their lives better. So this is the visual, right? The ambient AMSR visual of the True Hemp Science website. And if you're interested in finding out about some of the best hemp products I think that are around, all you have to do is go to the website. And in this case, if you want to use truehempscience.com/ref/23, truehempscience.com/ref/23. I'll make sure I leave this in the show notes. You can go in there and you can poke around and you can get any number of products externally and internally. There's salves. There's a whole variety of CBD products that are available here. And if you use the code 15MINS on checkout, and you spend $100 or more, you get free product. Again, some of the things that I really enjoy, of course, are the gummies, the CBD sleep gummies. They're fantastic. And then the moon dust, which is a whole nother powder to add to your elixirs. That's fantastic. So if you spend $150 or more, you get free shipping. So there you go. That's our sponsor, True Hemp Science. And if you want to make CBD part of your regimen, I highly recommend them. All right, let's bring the Crimies on. And Steve is a he's got kind of a master's class of Gnosticism rattling around between his ears. And we're gonna have Steve as our Gnostic guide. He's gonna be our Gnostic way shower today. How are you guys doing?
Hello, Robert. Happy New Year, everyone. Yes, Hermes is the psychopomp. He is the leader to all the worlds, the underworlds, the overworlds. So good to be here. Good to be with everybody again.
In charge of communication.
In charge of communication, yes.
And backwards communication.
And
when
backwards,
he goes
forward?
when he goes backwards.
A friend of mine sent me an image of this Hermes pendulum this morning. Have you ever seen those Hermes pendulums?
No.
no.
They're pretty interesting.
You
It's
have
not
it,
just
you don't have an image.
Yeah, well, and Chris sent you an image of Hermes going backwards a
Did
while
you get
ago.
that? It's so
I'm-
beautiful.
Yeah,
Oh.
really? Okay.
Oh,
We'll
I was
give
like,
you-
Robert's gonna love this. It's
Quick look.
this marble statue with gold gilding on it, but it's from taken from behind, and he's like marching forward.
So it's
So-
like a Mercury retrograde.
Yeah. it
So
was perfect
quickly,
image.
this was my Christmas present from Chris.
Oh, look at that.
And
Beautiful.
Isn't
the
he
image
handsome?
was basically this from Mercury
Well, yeah,
retrograde.
that-
You get to see his butt.
Yeah.
You know, so yeah, so this is gorgeous. So this has a very high place on our altar
Let's
right
go to
now.
Ed.
So if it's backwards, is that a Mercury Uranus conjunction?
I think so. Oh boy.
It just might
Oh,
be,
boy.
Robert.
Yeah. I couldn't help myself.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Why wouldn't you?
So
Especially
Anyway.
for an astrologer.
So yeah, so here we go. Yep. So we're doing okay. We got through the New Year's. It's January 6th, as we said in our last show. Right now, the Supreme Court is gathering to decide whether or not to go through with the Brunson brothers case. So we probably won't know about that until, this afternoon, how that vote went, or how or if the proceedings finished in one day. Who knows? So
Should we take a quick news peek here?
I did
Yeah,
recently,
just
but you
not much to see.
can kind of look at it. We can look at it before we check out. So anyway, so that's all interesting. The Epiphany itself is, of course, an interesting holiday. It became Three Kings Day. It was originally the descent of Sophia into the Christos at the baptism in the River Jordan. That was the original January 6th holiday. And then that got eradicated in one of the many conferences that went on. So it's now became the arrival of the three kings with frankincense, myrrh, and gold, the three gifts, which have all their mystic meanings with it too.
Interesting.
So that's it. So you can look at it much more attuned to what we're talking about, because it's descent of the Sophia into the Christos. And in the Gnostic mythology, there is a partnership between them. The Christos has another form in the Gnostic mythology that we'll get to, and we'll see how far we get. And this is, it's a huge topic, goes through a number of shows. It could go through a number of shows, but there's a couple of things. I mean, mainly what happened, right, was when we were doing all those shows on Paolo Freire and with James Lindsay calling everybody and their brother a Gnostic, and he was
Right.
used pejoratively. And it didn't make sense to me, right? But apparently other people have had this problem. So I'm going to open with a quick quote from the scholar, Romanian scholar Ion Culianu, whose most famous book is Eros and Magic in the Renaissance, something like that. And very he's a real interesting scholar of the sacred and of sort of, outlying sacred things. And he died in 1991. He was actually talking to a graduate student, and then he graduate student left, and he walked into the bathroom and he was assassinated there. And because
Wow.
he had been writing against, and you might have to help me remember the name, Ceausescu, who was the Romanian,
Ceausescu.
Ceausescu.
right? So
Ceausescu,
he
yeah.
was writing against his regime in Romania, and members of what are called the Romanian Iron Guard are suspect, but it's still a cold murder. No one's caught whomever, but it was apparently there was some Romanian faction, leftist faction called the Iron Guard, who murdered him for his writings against him.
Wow.
So, and it was just, I remember at the time, because it's very rare that that sort of thing reaches into academia,
Yeah. Wow. That's heavy.
So, so that was 91. So he wrote this, once I believed that Gnosticism was a well-defined phenomenon belonging to the religious history of late antiquity. Of course, I was ready to accept the idea of different prolongations of ancient gnosis, and even that of spontaneous generation of views of the world, which at different times, the distinctive features of Gnosticism occur again. I was soon to learn, however, that I was a naif indeed. Not only Gnosis was Gnostic, but the Catholic authors were Gnostic. The Neoplatonic too. Reformation was Gnostic. Communism was Gnostic. Nazism was Gnostic. Liberalism, existentialism, and psychoanalysis were Gnostic too. Modern biology was Gnostic. Blake, Yeats, Kafka were Gnostic. I learned further that science is Gnostic and superstition is Gnostic. Hegel is Gnostic and Marx is Gnostic. All things and their opposite are equally Gnostic. So this is kind of the same problem, the same thing that I faced. I had thought Gnostics referred to the the Nag Hammadi texts, and of course they had some of the texts beforehand, and they had the writings of the early church fathers, who like Irenaeus, who wrote a book that everyone calls Against Heresies, but in fact the actual title of it is The Destruction and Fall of Gnosticism, which is interesting. So they even erased Gnosticism from the title of his book and changed it to Against Heresies. And so those were the original books that Gnosticism came to be known for a while. And then the Nag Hammadi library, just like as the Dead Sea Scrolls, so we talk about 1946 as a seminal year. Well, not only that, but that's also the revelation of these ancient texts. They were unearthed.
What happened in 46 and 47?
Yeah.
47 especially
Yeah.
was pregnant with.
Yeah, so all the CIA and all the control systems were kind of codified back then. And but also at the same time, and with the the release of the atomic bomb, then these things opened up into the public view. And it took a while, because the control systems also latched onto them. Dead Sea Scrolls, there were only, maybe a half a dozen scholars were allowed to see them for 40 years or something.
Right. Yeah.
Priestly cast.
Yeah. So they decided who was going to see these and what was going to be released.
Right.
And it wasn't until really like the 90s that they said, hey, enough, you got them for 50 years. What's the deal here?
Right.
And then somebody, because there are people who read ancient Greek and ancient Coptic and can understand these things, and not in the terms of, so the Catholic Church was still against the Gnostics through all this time and trying to control this, along with the Messianic Jewish religion. So, so that's a basic background. I can kind of jump into, should I just jump in, keep going? You're all good?
Yeah. I mean, one of the reasons why we wanted to have this conversation was because, you kind of wanted to set the record straight when it came to James Lindsay's work, which, by the way, even though he may not fully comprehend or understand Gnosticism, it doesn't take away from the intensity and the power of his ability to deconstruct things like critical race theory and cultural Marxism.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he's really brilliant at it.
Mm-hmm.
And The thing that's interesting about Lindsay is that, and we talked about this, is that he is not a Christian. Like that's not really a revelatory option for him. And he also, really treats Gnosticism as if it's almost an incurable disease, like something that a leper would have or something like
Treats
that.
it with disdain.
Right.
Disdain.
Which
So
is really unfortunate.
so he's an atheist, and he's an
Mhm.
avowed atheist. So that's kind of the setting for the show, and it was like, well, why don't we get into Gnosticism a bit more, so that people have a kind of a working understanding about what you're talking about, and what Lindsay is holding up as a mirror and saying that this is what's happening here, but that mirror is a distorted
You would
view.
have to imagine that an atheist is not going to have the insights into the fine points of Gnosticism and, the spiritual impulse that it is.
Well, maybe we're jumping ahead a little bit, but one of the things that he brings up when he talks about Gnosticism and a relationship to Paolo Freire and Marx is he says, Blake is a madman. He's insane. And one of the things that Blake theoretically has some commonality with, but very different, right? Like it's very different. Like with Freire, Freire talks about having your personal Easter, and that's the epiphany, that's the revelation, right? And it comes through identifying with the oppressed, and as a result of that, right, Freire begins to create this system that is heavily influenced by Marx and Gramsci and other people. And there is a little bit of commonality with Blake, but Blake is far more imaginative and far more cosmic. And Blake's maxim is, I must create a system of my own or be enslaved by others, right? So Freire is kind of doing the same thing in his own way, but he's far less original, right? He's
very archonic, isn't it?
Yeah, he's far less original. He's kludging off of other systems. And Blake has his own ciphers. Like he'll quote Virgil, or he'll quote Dante, or he'll use Swedenborg in his cosmology.
Mm-hmm.
But the amount of imagination of Blake versus Freire is it's not even close, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, comparing, Bach to Hoagie Carmichael, and no disrespect to Hoagie Carmichael, but that's what we're talking about here. So anyway, I think for me, I was willing to go along with Lindsay to a point until he got to Blake, and that was my full stop.
Oh, now you're messing with
now
my
you're
man.
messing, yeah.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
So where do you want to go? Do you want to start with the lamb stuff, the loose outline of
What's that?
It's gone.
Oh, you forgot. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the two things that you see, the accusations against Blake are antinomianism, nomos is law, right? So he doesn't believe in the descended law of the Bible,
in legal
of the
law.
10 Commandments and things like that. So that's a common attack against Gnosticism. Okay.
Right.
So John Lamlash, just gonna hold up the book. So there's two things. So there's two sets of talking about ancient Gnosticism. Right. So there's as discussed by the church and discussed by themselves, right? That there's the sort of the standard scholarly view. And then there's John Lamlash, who takes it to the nth degree. So what the scholars will say, well, it was just a mess of a different people, and that it was because the Christians said this, it was only a heresy within Christianity, right? So what John Lamlash does is broaden that reading of it and say, no, this connects back to the ancient mystery traditions.
And it goes all the way back all the way back to Iran.
And it goes back to ancient Persia also, right?
So that's where he sees that it had its origin point.
Mhm.
And then it's spread out through that region and then into Europe. And so you can see this Gnosticism is embedded in all of those traditions, and it's there in a nascent form, but he sees it going all the way back to Iran,
Right.
and not being born at the time of Christ.
Right. So this is so part of the control system says, no, this is just a heresy within Christianity. We need to condemn it and get rid of it, right? For particular reasons.
And I would add, what really astonished me when I was reading Lash's book is that there was a horrific centuries-long genocide of the participants of the mystery schools.
Mhm.
And it was just, they would just eradicate, just go in and torture and destroy any of the writings, the libraries, even the burning of the Library of Alexandria was not the
Right.
first and not the last.
Right.
And so there was one instance where I can't remember which library it was, not Alexandria, but it was before Hypatia was born, I think. But they were able to fire the furnaces in the baths, in the multiple hundreds of baths throughout the city for 6 months with the scrolls that were taken out of the libraries.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Incomprehensible.
Yeah.
What's been just
it's
deliberately destroyed.
it's interesting that you brought that up, because I was watching, Asha Logos. Have you ever encountered his
Yeah,
stuff?
the recent one with the French Revolution, we saw that.
Yeah, that was astonishing.
Right. So what happens? They go through and they burn everything.
Right.
Yep. Yeah.
Right. They
And we
go-
just finished watching for the third time The Rape of Europa. If you've never seen
I've
it,
seen that. It's
oh my God.
yeah.
You cannot imagine what took place in World War II.
Yeah,
Stunning.
it's about a 3 or 4 hour investment, that video.
It's
Rape
not
of
that long, it's
Europa,
not that
well, unless
long.
they cut it down, there's one it's like 2 hours on Amazon Prime.
But they gutted these libraries and works of art. It's mind blowing. Just watch
Right.
it.
Imagine what would happen
On
if
Amazon Prime.
we had those works,
Good Lord.
and
Right.
what we'd be able to tap into, that would be, pretty helpful.
Yeah,
during-
I don't
during our
believe, yeah,
time.
I don't, I am, it's hopeful, but I don't believe the story that the Vatican has them all.
No, I don't believe that either.
I think they
They
were
may
just,
have a lot, but
they were just so hell-bent, literally hell-bent on
Right.
doing what they did.
it was done with so much hatred.
Yeah.
This is what really comes across.
So, yeah, and so again, this comes to be this accusing people of what you're doing.
Mhm.
So with the Gnostics, and so I'll give you the standard scholarly interpretation of Gnosticism right now is the cosmogony, which is the formation of the cosmos. The cosmogony is not questioned so much, but there's a key point where there's a difference. So the standard reading by the scholars is that the Gnostics hated the world, is that Sophia created this demiurge who then created this imperfect and lousy world, and we have to hate it and leave it, and there's no connection with it, right? And so this is really the standard look that pretty much they all have today, and John Lash is against that.
And they got it from the church fathers.
Right. Well, this came from the church fathers, and there are certain antecedents to that in ancient Greek work, the Orphics, Pythagoreans to a certain extent, the Plato also, of course. They Empedocles even talks about it. They talk about being eternal, trapped within a physical body, within a the soul being stuck within a body. That's kind of a common theme. All right, but they're saying that the Gnostics took it so far where there was hatred of the body itself. And of course, Jesus, look at the Catholic Church and the flagellants and all the
Yeah,
body
yeah,
hatred
yeah. The
that they
hair
have.
shirts and all that stuff. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So really, who's calling people hating the world? So that's really the key aspect to it. And then of course anything sexual among the pagans, which again is life affirming, all of that becomes sort of this central attack against the Gnostics. All right. So one of the key points that John Lamb Lash says, who, for all I can tell, is an incredible scholar, and the books that he's working from were half burned. There's lacunae in the text. So then, of course, if you're a scholar and you're going to fill in that blank, your background is going to tell you what to fill in that blank, right?
Right.
So they recreate the text in their own image,
Lindsay, yeah.
right? Not in his image.
Mhm.
So this is one of the issues with the scholars, and they're stuck with their presuppositions, right? That this is a Christian heresy, and we fill it out. So John Lamb Lash, who, from all I can tell, is a really good Greek scholar, and and has taken all these bits and pieces and come up with a story.
And he really comes
story.
across as a practitioner and not just an intellect. He's not coming just from the intellect.
Right.
It's like he's had some kind of gnosis himself, it seems to me, in reading his work and listening to him speak.
True. So what he says is not that the demiurge, he says this is clear in the text, not that the demiurge is the creator of the world, but the demiurge thinks he's the creator of the world. All right. So this is the huge difference, and all of this swings on this pivot, that the Gnostics were not anti-world. The world was the body of Sophia, who they worshipped.
Maybe you should give a little backstory on the fall of Sophia. So how
okay,
is it that it's the body?
You can do that when I'm done.
Okay. All right.
Because you just read his book.
Okay.
So I'm just saying, so this is the main pivot, that the demiurge thinks he's the creator, and whereas Sophia, so he's not only the creator. So to understand that, you have to understand quickly the
Pleroma.
the plural. Well, the cosmogony of Gnosticism in general, which is what? So there's the one.
Which they call the pleroma, and then this Sophia is what's called an aeon, and there are apparently innumerable aeons.
Yeah, could be. It does. They're different forms.
And
could
they
be one,
seem
could be many.
to me, when I read about them, they seem to be qualities. So they're innumerable. So these aeons are in charge of different categories of lived experience. So Sophia comes out of the pleroma. She falls out of the pleroma, and she has this tremendous desire to create. And so she falls out and becomes Earth. She actually becomes this planet.
But what's the problem?
I forget.
Well, the problem is that she does it without permission
Well,
of the
I
one.
kind of blanked that out because
Right.
Oh, really?
Well, she does it. So that's the error of Sophia, is in just being so full of desire to create,
So
that she does so without permission of the other aeons, and going back, and the one.
And the one. So that's her fault. And then there needs to be a correction. So there is this distortion in the world because of that desire was so overwhelming. And it's interesting that the Bhagavad Gita gets into desire as well, that it's the precursor to all of the fall. And it leads to an untimely death. But so that's what happens. And then there's still this, it's like an open wound, you could say, or an incompleteness. And it's called, her correction. So we need to find out then, how does this come around full circle and put a bow on it and say, well, how does Sophia's correction take place? What is this wound.
Can I add something? too?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and the creation of and through this era of hers, the universe is created with the demiurge and the archons. They come like sort of like as this accident from what she has done.
They kind of like a side effect.
So according to the Gnostic cosmology, that it's only the earth, the moon, and the sun that are of Sophia. The rest of the planets are of the archons. And archon in Greek means ruler or controller or something like that, right?
So that's a little background, at least on what is Sophia. She is an archon. Excuse me, she is an aeon. She's one of the aeons.
Aeon. So yeah, so our redemption. So the other aspect of this that's very destructive coming out of Gnosticism, and especially according to John Lamb Lash, is the soteriology or the redemption story. All right. So for the Gnostics, so gnosis is revelation. It's revelatory knowledge, right? It's direct experience of the divine. All right. So that is gnosis for the Gnostics. So this is where, that definition, that is the definition that gets lost by the time, you get to James Lindsay, and it's completely, downgraded, right? And I have actually where I think that happens, who really brings that about. So anyway, so for Lash, the Christians, the problem is the Christians entered through their connection with the Old Testament and with the Jews. It becomes all about the Redeemer, becomes about the Messiah, becomes about salvation from without, right? Whereas for the Gnostics, it was about salvation through the vision, because because otherwise, how can you really be redeemed by by anything outside of you, right? How can you be redeemed by pistis, which is belief? How can you be redeemed by mere belief? And
the sacrifice on the cross, so that the Christ suffered and died for your sins. If you think about it, that's a very, very problematic framework. So what kind of came to surface when we were reading this is that this is really child sacrifice. So God the Father sacrifices his only begotten son. Mm-hmm. So this is an instance of child sacrifice, really. Even though he's an adult, Christ is still the Son of God.
Yeah. I remember being picked up by these born-again Christians, father and son duo. They're actually very nice to me. I was in the middle of nowhere in New Mexico, and I had a flat, and I was on the side of the road, and I didn't know they were Christians, but they picked me up and they took me to this town, and they were able to hook me up with a tire on a Sunday evening. I was like, okay,
you mentioned
this
it.
is
You need
great.
to come closer to the microphone.
Yeah. So on the way back to my van, they brought up the whole, killing his only begotten son, right? And they were saying, wow, isn't that
wonderful?
He loved him so much, he killed him.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, that doesn't make any sense to me. I'm sorry.
Right.
If I'm a parent, that's one of the last things I want to do, right?
Everything's context. It's how you contextualize
Right.
the story.
Yeah.
And it's always been painted with this beautiful brush that, that's what love is. Sacrifice, suffering, and then that kind of flows out. And when the conquistadores come to the Americas, how do they express their love of Christ? Well, they flay the Indians alive, and Columbus was so amazed when he landed here, and he's saying, these are the happiest people I've ever seen. It's just like a paradise here. Let's kill them. They don't have Christ in their heart.
In groups of 12.
In groups of 12. To recapitulate the apostolic.
And that's been a lot of the research. I'm finishing up this chapter on involves child sacrifice in the book. And this goes back to to Yahweh, to Baal, And the fact is that, you know, when you read the story of Abraham, there's no objection. He doesn't say,
Right.
you know, hey God, what's up? You know, as Dylan says in his song, you know, in Highway 61 Revisited. You know, because of the research that I've been doing indicates that it was just regular circumstance. If you wanted to get something from your gods in the Phoenician and then following it into early Judaic tradition, you sacrificed your eldest son. It was just what you did. You didn't argue. It was seen as what you did. And this is what Abraham does. And so, you know, and so the Christians kind of, the story, the messianic story with Jesus is that, you know, he dies and it's kind of like, well, now that God's done it, it's a one and done. We don't do this anymore.
Right.
You know, he's done it for all of us. All right. So that's, you know, by the premise, by the flick, as they say. So, So that's where this sort of difference takes place. And then again, John Lamb Lash is looking at this as a far older system, just like the Sufis would be, you know, many of the Sufis consider themselves pre-Islam, you know, going back to, you know, really ancient religions and things like that. And again, it's all about, for the Gnostics, it's all about revelation. And then once you get outside of, you know, individual revelation, which is also what the mystery traditions were about, you would go through an initiation. I mean, you know, Eleusis, I don't know, was it 900 years, something like that? It was active. And so the winners, of course, become the Christians. And the final nail is the death of Hypatia. I don't know. I don't know if you want to take a note into that and bring up the pictures of Hypatia.
Sure.
So Hypatia is considered the last of the initiates, the last of the pagans. She was a brilliant woman in Alexandria.
Is that image 2 or 3?
2, I think. It's 2 and 3.
2 and 3. Okay. We'll
I did one from the movie and
the movie Agora is well worth watching if you want to get a sense of the physical layout.
So there's the classical image there.
Right. So that's the famous painting called Raphael's School of Athens, where he's got all the philosophers out. And it's really interesting. So there's Hypatia once she's got an unusually small head, but that's besides that. She's at the center point, almost like the belt of Orion between Pythagoras, who's writing the book on the bottom left, and Socrates in the green robe on the top.
Right.
And next to them, you've got Parmenides, looked like he's trying to get Pythagoras' attention. So, but the weird thing about her is she's the only one who's looking at the camera.
Right. Or the she's looking at us, right?
Looking at the viewer. So really interesting. But I guess the thing is, Hypatia is emblematic of what the pagans had to go through. And at the point of her death in 415, the church had risen into enough power, whereas Cyril, who later got sainted for his good deeds, basically ordered her killing. Who was the bishop of Alexandria at the time. Alexandria, 100 years before, was a much mellower and equanimous place for various religions. You know, it was just a hotbed. But her father was the head of the library in the Serapion. Serapis was kind of this god that became sort of this amalgam of Isis and Zeus and other Greek, sort of like a combination of Greek and Egyptian deities. So I don't know if you want to say something about Hypatia, because I can.
About how she died? I really want to tell people how she died.
Yeah.
It's really a horrific death. So this woman was considered to be incredibly beautiful, and her intellect was unsurpassed, and she was a teacher. at one of the classrooms that was an adjunct to the Library of Alexandria. And so she had the habit of going out, but when she was finished with her classes, she'd go out on her chariot through the crowds, and she would stop and talk to people and get engaged in conversation. And this one day she stopped to talk, and she was accosted by a mob of Christians who were calling her a witch and a harlot and all kinds of horrible names. And they attacked her, and they pulled her from the chariot and started to physically attack her. They broke her jaw. They murdered her on the spot. And then they weren't satisfied with the murder. They became frenzied, and they pulled her body. They dismembered her. They just pulled the whole body apart. And then they went down to the harbor, and they picked up these razor sharp oyster shells, and they took all of the flesh from her bones. And even that was not enough. Then they went to an area called the Cindron, I guess like cinders, where they would, maybe it was, I don't know if they burned bodies there or what they did, maybe like the burning ghats in India. And they took those bones of that woman and they burnt them to ash. And then they were just celebrating in triumphant victory. That's how this ended. And that put the lid on this incredible centuries-old movement of intellect and spiritual maturity, really. So it's been the same ever since. It's never really been lifted. That sick, twisted kind of, especially with the Catholic Church being, we're the one true religion and everyone else has to go. And then they carried that through. And then you've got this genocide that takes place across the continent of Europe, where all of these people who were Gnostics were hunted down and murdered. It was an incredible genocide took place over centuries. And then all of their teachings were burned. And as we said earlier about that one library, it was 6 months burning the scrolls in the furnaces. But there were many, many, many of those libraries. Alexandria was not the only one. Right. And they systematically went through, and the church ordered these documents to be destroyed, and the people to be either had to go underground and not be known as Gnostics, or they were murdered. Yeah. And then you still have that. Now we look at pagans as a derogatory term. But these were the people, the teachers of the mystery schools. She created the astrolabe. Or developed it, whatever. Yeah. So, these were very highly intelligent people, highly spiritual people, and people with direct knowledge of the divine. It was not something that was up in the head. It wasn't an intellect. It was not dogma. It was direct experience. And that's where John Lamb Lash really, in his book, does such a wonderful job of elucidating this whole story, the incredible, overwhelming tragedy of what happened to these people. And that's our ancestors. That's where we come from.
Yeah. And so one thing to note in the story is that the shells, right, the seashells were symbols of an initiate. Especially, and then much later through the through the Compostela walk, all these sort of initiatory journeys that were externalized in Christendom as the Compostela walk and things like that. But still, there was a symbol of being an initiate. So of course they scraped her body with that symbol. And also then, as you could probably see, that the connection, what they did to her with what went on during the French Revolution. And it wasn't just enough to murder somebody.
Right. But that continues today with the torture. So that's a big mess.
So that's the really the end point of the ancient world and ancient Gnosticism. Everyone just kind of says that's it. It ends with her 415, and then as you know, we kind of then there's that movement into what's called the Dark Ages, really with Rome, and that lasts quite a while before.
Yeah, that's a very interesting patch of history. Yeah, whatever the Dark Ages were, right? I mean, so we don't really know. I mean, because there
No.
could have been things that have gone on during the Dark Ages
Mhm.
that they've obscured from us.
Yeah.
It's just, it's
Right.
it's like, when you go onto Google Earth and they kind of blur things out on Google Earth,
Mhm,
so you
mhm.
can't see them. The Dark
Right,
Ages,
right,
I
right.
think, have some of that associated with them. And then you get people
Obfuscation.
like Scaliger, who begins to, theoretically rewrite history and begins to ascribe certain epochs and eras for a certain time. Like, we don't really know. There are parts where, we're literally in the dark, right? Anyway.
Yeah, and
it's-
and even kings couldn't write,
Yeah.
very often. It was-
So where does the Albigensian Crusade fall into all this? Because that was a big moment in the routing of the Cathars, who were essentially Gnostics.
well,
Mm.
they were there were a number of groups of Gnostics, and I think southern France, especially because of its long association with Magdalene,
Mhm.
there's some sort of lineage through that,
Right.
that there was, and so Magdalene would have been their crypto worship of Sophia within Magdalene, and you could see through, the church couldn't get rid of Sophia, comes
Right.
up in Mary, you can see, Mother of God,
Mhm.
it's part of the Gnostic myth, Sophia being the mother
Right.
of God. So, and another part of that myth,
Then
which
why
we
would
didn't
she have to
mention,
ask permission?
well,
I
Well, she's mother
do
of-
have to
of
say,
this
I
guy.
was not happy with that.
so in the Gnostic myth, the Christos is another aeon
Mhm.
who comes to assist Sophia after she's kind of in trouble and lost in her own creation.
Right.
And then the help, so in some of the Gnostic groups anyway, so that the man Jesus, who on this day, on the day of the Epiphany, receives the wisdom from the Sophia, is sort of a human emanation of the Christos, and then he receives that emanation in fullness, and this is a big part of Steiner's Christianity too, is that this is what happened on there, is that this body it could only hold the Christos for so long anyway. It was such a power.
That makes sense.
So, and as far as and so again, it's just a recapitulation of what was happening. What is it, in the 1300s? I guess 900 years before, or what began 900 years before, kind of ended there. Is that they had to wipe out any aspect of Gnosticism. They had their ways of being, and so they had a separate priesthood, and then they had people who lived their life. You find this in a number of places, but this was just spectacular because it was thousands of people that were again burned at after their surrender. So I've read about it, but I don't have in my head details about them, unless you can fill in. I just know that it was kind of almost like the last stand of any aspect of Gnosticism that was running around, or had
Mhm.
found little cubby holes here and there.
The Cathars.
Yeah.
Yeah. They were an interesting group. I was just reading about them a little bit while you were talking. I'm kind of double tracking here. And this gets into the sort of this Gnostic relationship with the earth as being imperfect, right? I mean, the Cathars kind of took it to an extreme, and apparently they regarded water as being unclean because it was corrupted by the earth. And so they would not use water for baptism, but they had another form of baptism,
That's curious.
which was the laying on of hands. and that was known as the consolamentum.
Hmm.
And that would happen prior to a person passing away, right?
Oh,
So they
it's
would,
at the
so
end
they,
of their
The
life.
consoling, yeah.
yeah. So by doing that, right, they were theoretically given a better chance of ascending to a higher place in heaven. It says after receiving the consolamentum, the recipient became known as perfectus. Having become perfect, the soul upon the death of the body could escape the perpetual cycle of death and rebirth and achieve salvation. So that was one of the Cathars practices. And so you can see a little bit of Gnosticism in there, right?
Right.
But-
Yeah. So
yeah.
I don't, yeah. Again, because we know so little about the original Gnostics or what they practiced or what they were, because none of them called themselves that. They were certain groups. There's some group called the Sethians. There was followers of Marcion in Anatolia. So there are a number of groups that are known, but really it's like the Orphics too. No one really, they posit, because we have some texts, that there was an Orphic religion of some kind, but no one really knows much of it about it. And if there was much written
Right.
about it, it's it's got to be lost by now. So the Cathar, yeah. So I don't know, how much the Cathars map onto it. And I know the Jungians kind of it's just because the story is so is so intense about the massive destruction of them.
Yeah.
But I don't think we have to get, I don't know how deep you want to get into the Redeemer complex, or you want to just get into Frieri and Lindsay and all that.
Okay.
So I think it'd be really helpful, really quickly, if I could show people. Let me get out of the image here. If I could show people, let's see, if I can pull this up here. And I think you sent me something like this, but this is a kind of a blueprint or a schema.
The Valentinian Gnosticism.
Yeah. If I can find it here.
Yeah, Valentinus, from whence we get Saint Valentine, he almost made Gnosticism mainstream, or his form of Gnosticism mainstream. And
Mhm.
he was actually almost elected Bishop of Rome.
Interesting.
So that you could imagine,
What a different world.
yes, you imagine what a different church it would be. If the Church of Peter was the Church of Valentine.
Oh yeah. So let me see, Steve, maybe you can do a little commentary on this.
Well,
This is the kind of the cosmic blueprint for the Gnostic model here.
well, there you go. There's the cosmogony.
Yeah, the
Go ahead.
cosmology.
Yeah.
No.
No, you okay?
Yeah, good.
So, all right. So the one is all right. So this is kind of what we're talking about. The one, this, I'm not sure about this one, but anyway. So there's, all right. Everything begins with the one,
Mhm.
and again, one of the Plotinus, one of his arguments against the Gnostics is that they got to be too baroque. They got too many things going on, right? That was one of his.
I could actually see where he could have an argument with that, by the way.
Right.
Because
So
it's too I wouldn't say it's too complex, but
Right.
it's certainly not being able, it's not going to be able to be grasped as something as simple as you serve this being who has been sacrificed, right? And then through that being is the portal to the Heavenly Father, and all things come to you through that. Like, that's a really simple model.
Right. Yeah, it's either
Yeah.
that or the judgment,
Right. Yeah.
the judgment and then the final judgment.
This
Yeah.
is definitely a little more heady and intellectual.
Right. This is a
Well,
little
that's-
different.
they were
Going over
intellectuals.
quickly. Okay, so there's a little different than what I'm used to, but that's fine. So yeah, because this is one where they insert the Christ in this. This is a more Christianized one where it's the Father, the Mother, and the Christ
Right.
are all in the first sphere outside of the one. All right, where the usual, the more ancient sounding versions, the Christ, the Christos, and the Sophia, are the aeons later out. But so I'm not sure if this is Valentinian or not. But yeah, so there's 4 lights, and then the 12 aeons. They're associating here with planets, but the aeons usually would include Sophia. All right, so they have Sophia as lower wisdom. Okay, so the emanation, so this is actually pretty good. It's kind of what we said. So the emanations from Sophia, what they're calling lower wisdom. So again, they're having Yaldabaoth as the creator, whereas again we said before for Lash, Yaldabaoth only thinks that he is the creator. And then we have the archons and the controllers, which emanate from Yaldabaoth, and here they're associating with planets. Of course, they don't seem like they're very good. The archons don't seem like they have some very good qualities.
No.
Deceit, injustice, wrath, pride, lust, greed, and inconstancy. Those are basically the 7 deadly sins.
Right.
So those are the emanations of the archons, and unfortunately they've associated them with the planets, which actually doesn't make sense to me. So that's some kind of a later interpolation. But it's kind of like what we said. Sophia is this aeon, and our creation is her. Our creation is her. So for the Gnostics of as far as John Lamb Lash goes, that we are the body of Sophia. We have the spark of divine wisdom, and that spark and coming to waken that spark within us is Gnosis, because Gnosis again revelation does not come from without, it explodes from within. Right. So I think that's it. You got anything you want to hop on?
Well, toward the end of the book, and it was right at the end of his book, he reveals what he believes is the correction for Sophia's mistake. And it turns out that it is what's called anoia. And that is like a very high level of like active imagination, what Jung would call the active imagination of the human being. So it turns out in the end that the human is actually the correction for the mistake. And that is one of the reasons why we're so sought after by the powers that be to suppress us, because these archonic forces would like to take over the human and turn it into something mechanical. But this active imagination and this life spark that is in the human being, in the anthropos, which is called in Gnosticism, is the correction. We are the correction. And to me, this was like worth every single page that I read in the book. And I almost didn't finish it last night. I was like, right at the very end, I'm like, oh, I got 3 more pages to go. Should I finish it tonight? And I was rewarded with that gem. That's the takeaway.
Yeah. As when we were working with Peter Kingsley, he would talk about that no, everyone is, praying to God for this, that, and the other thing. No one asks the divine what they need from us or what it needs.
It's kind of like John Kennedy saying, what can you do for your country?
Right. And so, and I don't forget where he gets this, but
Maybe
you want to talk about this? John Lash.
Oh, the big thing was, with the artificial intelligence, that this maps on so clean onto the whole model of artificial intelligence, that the archonic movement is to take over human beings and put that chip in your brain
Right.
and complete. That's the end. That's the end game. Once that chip is in the human brain, it's game over.
Wouldn't that be almost like a model of like the false or the synthetic correction? Right. Like you're imperfect. So we're going to put a chip in your brain.
Because that's
And-
all that they have is imperfection. And,
Yeah.
you know, we were talking to Shona last night and talking about everything's an inversion, even like the male, female, you know, all the transgenderism, you know, the male's the female, the female's the male. And well, a transgender male gets together with a transgender female and then have a child. And, you
Yeah,
know,
that's been going on for a while, but yeah,
yes, but
it's
when you
headlines
look
now,
at it
you know.
through the lens of Gnosticism and the archons, with everything being distorted, then it makes perfect sense. It is
Right.
insanity. And from our perspective, it's pure insanity.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
this gives you a framework to understand how it's operating. What is the mechanics of it?
Right. So
It answers a lot of questions.
it answers questions for sure in terms of like the social milieu or this paradigm that we're in. We can really hold the Gnostic lens up to it and we can see like what's happening, right? I mean, it can be a very interesting sort of guide for the time that
If
we're
you
in.
have
for
a good
sure.
understanding, if you have a spiritual understanding of it and not just an intellectual approach, and you're reading something from the church fathers, right? So
Right.
depends on which lens you look at it through.
Yeah, for sure. So here's the game plan and the roadmap for the rest of the show. At 2:00, we're going to have kind of a hard stop. And if you're members of the 11th house, we're going to continue this conversation with the Crimies over on our Discord, which will be great because you'll be able to ask the Crimies questions and interact with them. So if you're a member of the 11th house, go hang out on our Discord at 2 p.m. Central Standard Time. We'll be there for about an hour doing that.
We figure out how to get in. So then let me
Yeah.
jump into the James Lindsay then.
Let's do the James Lindsay. And if we
Okay.
have to go and make this a two-parter, we'll do that.
Yeah, but this it's at least this is a good quick. I think I got it down. So there's a guy named Eric Vogel that Lindsay quotes a lot, and I think he was a writer in the 50s, as far as I know. I don't know a lot about him. I've not read him. His famous saying is that Gnostics immanentizing the eschaton. All right. So in traditional, and he seems to be a religious scholar. So in traditional religious metaphysics, there's the two levels. What the cross depicts, right, is the
The transcendent,
transcendent
and
the immanent. In the immanent, sorry. Yes, the immanent and the transcendent. Okay. So he's saying that what his criticism of Gnosticism is that they were trying to create, bringing the immanent down, whereas the church always has the immanent as separate, apart, alien to us, right? All the
Right.
Abrahamic religions do that.
Right. Yeah.
So he creates this, so he Vogelin, and this is, I think Lindsay is following on Vogelin. He creates this distinction between gnosis and Gnosticism, okay, for his own reasons. Whereas, earlier you wouldn't make that distinction, but anyway, so basically, gnosis is a direct. This is quoting Vogelin, a purported direct, immediate apprehension or vision of truth without the need of critical reflection. A special gift of spiritual and cognitive elites. Now this is the other part, is everything's elitist, if you're not in the club, right? Right. If you've got somebody, like Rumi's an elitist because he has an incredible spiritual vision, right? This is how people
And
deal with
elitism would always have to involve ego.
Right.
So that would immediately eliminate it from
Right.
any spiritual attainment.
if it's true, right? So, and his Gnosticism is a type of thinking that claims absolute cognitive mastery over reality, right? So there's the shift. So he's made this distinction, and so now Gnosticism is not revelation, but it's cognitive understanding.
It's
So it's a
thoughts about
system.
revelation.
So yes, it's thought born, and as I always like to say, you do not get to the real through thought.
Mhm.
So this is where, so then from there, Vogel calls Gnostics antinomian. They don't follow the rules or scriptural law. Because, and this is the thing, if you have gnosis, if you have inner understanding of reality, what do you need of a codified moral law from somebody? You don't need the 10 Commandments. You don't need, because you know what to do.
Right.
You know what to do because of that revelation and that vision that lives inside you. It doesn't just pop in and out.
Right. Everyone knows right from wrong.
So, but what they have done then, and I'm sure it happened before that, but Vogel seems to have codified it into if you have a system, now you're a Gnostic. So therefore Hegel, Marx, all these people, and then then Blake has a system of I'm sure Blake's system is coming from revelation, right? But Marx, Hegel's, and Freiere's is not coming from revelation. It's just, it's crusted thought and thinking, and they just and so the offspring of that, but and you can't critique it, right? And you can't critique revelation, but you can, but if you're saying it's, acting as if it's revelation and it's only a bunch of thoughts you put together, and then saying, oh, you can't critique it because I got the whole system. And that's one thing that comes up over and over again. What Lindsay says, I know and you don't. You can't critique, Marx says you can't critique me. Freire, you can't critique me. Critical theory, you can't critique me. I just critique everything else, right?
Right. Right.
So this is really, and then their offspring, the World Economic Forum, PNAC, Progress for New American Century, who take their ideology from a particular reading of Plato, where they are the elites, they know, but they don't know. They just know what they just know what they want from us. They don't know, they really don't know anything except how to control and things like that. So this is where the
and we came to the understanding this morning at breakfast talking about this, that it's a form of theft. So this idea of elitism, that you can't criticize or say anything against me, is a stealing of, when someone has a divine revelation and a gnosis knowledge, direct perception, there is no criticizing that. It is a direct perception from the divine, of the divine. They take that and say, well, because we've got this system and we believe we're right, and we have an intellectual perception of what it is, you can't criticize us. But if you think about it and you think about the framework of the structure of how all this hangs, that's a theft of an actual divine revelatory experience. They're taking that and saying, you can't criticize our work.
Well, in some ways, aren't they copying the fallen creator of the world?
Exactly.
Who believes that they've
Which is all they
created the
can
world?
do is copy. They have no creativity. They have no originality.
Right.
All they can do is copy and steal. It's theft.
Right.
Copying
Right.
is stealing.
Right. Interesting.
Yeah. And so
That's why I love, the more you talk about this, the more it reveals itself, this whole system. You read John's book and then you say, oh, okay, now I have something to work with to understand the framework upon which all of this hangs.
So what was Vogelin's religious status?
I think he was a Christian.
Okay.
Pretty sure. I didn't get to delve too deeply into him. So so this cycles back to where we began with Lindsay. So he is calling everyone a Gnostic based on this step down definition of a cognitive system rather than revelation, because Lindsay, as an atheist, would take no stock in revelation anyway. So for him, it all would be a cognitive system. And And I guess if I were to critique him, which I don't know if I'm allowed to do, he gets pretty pissy if you critique him. I've
Who's-
Oh,
noticed.
and he has no patience for people.
Lindsay.
Yeah.
Lindsay, you
Oh,
know,
really?
we've got a Truth Social. I think we just like once every 3 months I'll look at, and he gets very pissy. Anyway,
Is he on Truth Social?
yes, I'm not that's the only thing that we're kind of we're hooked into. It's not something we see much. Anyway, but his whole he actually, you know, falls prey to his own "I know and you don't" definition of Gnosticism.
Right,
You know, so he ends up being a Gnostic himself by his own definition in some way.
right.
You know, and you know, it's like everything else. Everything's you know, everything's imperfect in this world, and you know, that's why we have to work continuously on you know, discernment and you know, going back to the beginnings, understanding where Gnosticism comes from and what have you, so you have an idea of, you know, what he means with this and all that.
Right. So again, for me, and I think for you guys too, I still recommend watching his videos.
Oh, I agree.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, his scholasticism is great.
yeah. And if you
Yeah,
want to know what they're up to,
Mhm.
they're wonderful.
Yeah.
And-
Yeah, and he's very
absolutely.
clear.
If you want to know
He
what,
knows the system, he knows the players.
Yeah.
and if you want to know what he's up to, you can talk to us.
Right. Just when he gets to the Gnostic part, you know, start to, you know, interpret that.
Right, we all
through-
have
through
limits.
a bit of a
Disappointing.
filter.
Yeah, and we
It's
all have limits.
disappointing.
We all have limits. So,
We do have limits.
you know,
Yeah.
so,
Mhm.
anyway, so I don't know, I think that's kind of really most of what we wanted to say, which is good. We got it in.
Yeah.
We got to just spend like a couple of minutes. We got, you know, 2 new books.
And
to
you
talk
did a
about.
whole presentation on Gnosticism and the Matrix. And I'll leave that as a link for people to go
Yeah.
check out in the show notes.
So you get to see my first talk.
Yeah, that'll be cool.
It's my first talk in 2003 on the Matrix movies as a Gnostic system.
It totally is a Gnostic system.
And you know, whatever you know, it was just crazy. I got invited to do this talk, and then there's about 50 people show up at this quote unquote spiritual place in town. And I go, and because they're most of them were there because they go to things at that place. So I go, it's all right, you know, it was right after the second Matrix movie, and and so everybody gathered. So I said, "Oh, raise your hand, you know, how many people have seen the movies?" And it was like a third or a quarter of them had seen the movies. And they're like, "Oh shit, I'm gonna have to talk about plot."
Right.
So it's a long talk because of that.
So you could fast forward a little bit.
Anyway, but you get to see me with my 6-foot ponytail. I don't know. So is that
We
it? I
could
think
end
that's
with the credo of the Gnostics,
okay.
if you want to
We
do
got
that.
we
I
got a
think
minute.
we could put a bow on it with that. So the credo of the Christians is, for God, who so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. The Gospel of John is where that comes from. The Gnostics code or credo says, a great power was emanated to you, which the all originator, the eternal, endowed in you before you came to this place, in order that those things that are difficult to distinguish, you might distinguish, and those things that are unknown to the multitude, you might know. And there's that exclusive word. And that you might be released sane and whole to the one, with a capital O, for the one who is yours, in you, who was the first to save and who does not need to be saved. And that comes from Allogenes from the Nag Hammadi library. So there's the difference between the two systems. There's an emanation
Right.
and a
Right.
knowing.
Very
Right.
interesting. Well, why don't you tell people about your publishing company and the books and everything else that they can
Right.
get from you guys?
So Logosophia Books, we just let's just say we took over the publishing of Shona's book,
Right.
Love and Spirit Medicine.
Right.
And
right,
this is a
yeah.
wonderful book. And so we just reprinted it. We've taken over the printing of it. Sean was very kind. She's, she's initiating a whole new endeavor. It's called Mushrooms Apprentice.
YouTube channel. on
So we're
YouTube.
doing that, and then her poetry that she gets, we're gonna do that book
So
early this
yeah,
year.
through her journeys, I guess the elementals come through.
Yeah,
Is that who it is?
well-
But it comes through in poetry. So she
Love
reads
and Spirit
poetry.
Medicine is a great book.
it
really
is. It
wonderful.
is. So yeah, so we've taken over the pub. We've got a new cover and new design of the cover, but basically it's the exact same book.
Yeah.
So anyway, we're excited to work with her. We know you did a show with her that's probably going to come out on her channel, and I think we're going to do one next
Yeah.
month or something. All right, and then Elisa E's book is doing really well. She's been everywhere on being interviewed. Seems to be huge in New Zealand and Australia.
We get a
and
lot of orders.
selling a
from
lot
there.
of books in
Wow.
there.
Interesting.
So this is about her
Recovery.
recovery.
But also her
from her
experiences, her
cancer.
journey.
Yeah, it's a really intense book, but
Yeah.
it's an amazing book. She's been everywhere. She's been on Sarah Westfall. She's going to be with
And she'll be
Gareth
back.
Icke and Sean Stone.
Sean Stone is interested.
So,
And
so-
Sarah Westall is going to have her back again for a
Right.
second visit.
right. And then she's, I think, doing a regular thing with Emily.
Great.
Emily.
Yeah. Well, I have a copy of the book. I've got to get to it, and I need to get her on this show too.
Yes, definitely. Definitely.
awesome.
And she's a
She's really
She's a
easy
really
to
good-
interview.
a real good guest too. I mean, geez, I wish I was that good.
She's easy on the interviewer because she'll expound and she's very well presented.
Right.
So she'll
Um,
talk, she'll give you details, and you can just every once in a while throw in a few questions and she'll just roll with it.
Right.
Um,
Well, you got some-
And she's
recommend-
lovely.
You got some great titles there now. Well, you always did, but these are really good.
Yeah, we're doing well. I'm going to recommend Philip K. Dick's book, The Divine Invasion, which is a reworking of the Gnostic myth.
Mhm.
And I like this edition. These are editions that have been come out recently. And the reason I like them, besides their hardcover, they're really nicely made, and they have
Oh, look.
the
Oh, it's
page,
like
the page
your
saver. that's so old school. I love
The
it.
tassel,
St. Joseph's
the
Daily
tassel.
Missal.
Yep. So that's really good. And if you
That on the
if
website.
you really
We
want to
should
go
have
nuts,
book
the Gnostic
recommendations.
Pynchon. This is the second most valuable book in my collection. It's impossible to find, but that's about Gnosis and Thomas Pynchon. I just thought I'd pull that out for fun.
Okay.
And I don't know what other pictures I sent you, but I can't remember now, but it doesn't matter.
You said there was
Well,
another one of Hypatia?
No, we show the two of Hypatia.
Well,
Yeah,
if we
the
have some,
movie-
if we have some loose ends, we'll tie them up.
Yeah, the movie
the next time we're
Agora.
on.
Yeah,
yeah.
recommend the movie Agora.
Yeah, so two
it's-
recommendations on film. So Agora and also The Rape of Europa. And that's
Okay.
on Amazon
Yeah,
Prime.
and the Asha logos, that's pretty intense.
Right.
The
on
Asha
the-
logos on the French Revolution.
Yeah.
But the Agora is the closest, I would imagine, depiction of living in an ancient
And
classical
it's
city. Was living.
Visually stunning. It's
Yeah.
really a beautiful
Yeah,
film.
did a great job on that, and Rachel White's is pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Crimies,
Robert.
always great to have you here on Friday. And I'm going to open up the Discord to members. And if you can come by and make it and give it a go, that'd be awesome.
Yeah,
And if not, well, we'll still be open for about an hour. We'll talk about some of this stuff
Okay.
in our own little private chat club.
yeah.
And we'll
Thank
see you in a
for
month.
having me.
And nice shirt, Robert. Nice
Yeah, I'm noticing.
starched
That
and
looks
everything.
good.
Oh,
You know, I got up this morning. I did the Astro weather in this shirt.
yeah,
And I really didn't have time to change it because I wanted to change between shows. And I'm like, I'm just going to
Looks
keep it
very
on.
nice.
yeah.
And it really sets off the artwork behind you.
And I thought, there's a nice contrast between the
Crisp and
shirt and,
clean.
Yeah.
Looks good.
Yeah,
and
the
white.
Astro shows. Yeah, and we're enjoying the Astro show. You're doing a nice job with that.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, hopefully we'll see you guys in Discord, and you
All right.
both take care. And
Okay,
we'll see
take
you
care,
here in a
everybody.
month. Okay,
In a month.
in a
Bye,
month.
everybody.
All right. There we go. Those are our friends, our good friends, the Crimies, all the way from Asheville, North Carolina. We're going to sign off here, and we're going to jump on over to the Discord. And if you're a member, come on in and join us. And if you want to be a member, all you got to do is go to my website, robertphoenix.com. We have 3 levels of membership. We have a 5, a 10, and a 20. They all get you into Discord. And I just recently did a webinar this last week, 2023, the astrological preview of 2023. And that was a members only webinar, close to 3 hours. And if you haven't got that webinar and you're a member, please let me know, because we did send it out to the list, even if you weren't there live. So membership does have its privileges, and that's one of them. Of course, there's a few more as well. Use your head in order to discern what's real, your heart to say what's possible. I'm Robert Phoenix. Enjoy the full moon, and we'll see you back here on Sunday night for Sunday Night Astro Live with many